My next guest is one of the very few, very senior members of the government who can say of isolation, been there, done it, because he got hit by it as well. It is the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. Grant, good of you to join us this morning.
Thank you. I'm not sure that's a boast I've ever played on before, but thank you for pointing it out.
You need to whisper in the ear of your press and spad people, because I think it's a good line if you can say, I know what I've done because I've been there. Had Simon Calder, who I know you know very well on the programme earlier, question one flowing from him, are you totally confident of the data that you're getting from places like Croatia, Austria, Trinidad and Tobago to be forced to take such a tough decision?
Yes, it's an interesting question for reasons I'll explain. But yes, we're confident that the data is correct. They publish, the individual countries publish data. That is then crunched by the European Centre for Disease Control and then by the Joint Biosecurity Centre, that's in the UK. And that's how we know that we've got data which is reliable. And where we have concerns about the reliability of data, in those cases, we are much quicker to act because there is a gap in the data. That's not the case with the countries that we've removed, which is Croatia, Austria, Trinidad and Tobago in this case. But give you an example, Croatia, the number of infections per 100,000 measured over a week have gone up from 10 to 27 in just 1 week, and 20 is the cutoff point. So you can see it's risen very high, very quickly in Croatia, and we absolutely need to act in order to protect all the hard work we've done in the UK to get our level down. We're at about 11.
Yeah, we don't want to import disease.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, second point. Why do you ban total countries when you know various bits of countries are okay? And the mayor of Sarajevo himself saying, look, there may be a problem in Croatia, but here, there and there, it's fine.
Yes. Well, for a start, obviously, people can travel around a country. There's nothing to stop people from doing that. So that sort of does mean that you need to act at a countrywide level. But another explanation, which is also very, very valid, is when we think about the UK, people say, well, we have local lockdowns and therefore couldn't you do the same when you look at Croatia or somewhere else? We get that information by doing a vast amount of surveying work and having a huge testing capacity. I know there was a lot of fuss because we started off only with 2,000 tests available a day. We now have 330,000 tests available every single day, the biggest test capacity in Europe. And we're testing a lot of people. Plus, the Office of National Statistics are going out and they're doing a survey. They've just expanded massively to 150,000 tests every fortnight. And that gives us a really detailed, granular, local authority by local authority idea of what's going on. We just don't have that capacity in a third country, in another country, to know in that level of detail, mainly because most countries aren't doing it in that level of detail, and we just don't have access to that level of information to be able to regionalize and say, oh, we'll keep split in, but we'll remove another town in Croatia. You can't really do that. We have to act on a countrywide basis.
Third and final point from Calder was he said, basically the message from Grant Shapps now is don't go anywhere unless you're prepared to take 2 weeks of self-isolation on the chin that may be revealed at a moment's notice. Is that your message to the good folk of the UK?
Grant Shapps has experienced this. I went to Spain and imposed a quarantine on Spain the day that I arrived there. And so I speak from personal experience when I say, of course, we're in this unprecedented situation where we've got this disease and we don't control it. It doesn't kind of respond to...
But are there specific countries on the back burner, as it were, where you and your officials are saying, blimey, we've done Croatia today, but I have to tell you, country X is looking tricky. Just one more percentage point up and we've got to drop a ban there as well.
So you actually, this is data which is publicly available. So the European Centre for Disease Control publishes global data, and it shows what the percentage is in any country. So people can look at that. But the only thing I'd caution, and 20 is the level we look at. The only thing I caution is not the only factor. Let me just tell you what it is. I've got a note of it here. So the Joint Biosecurity Centre, that's our centre that studies this information, is looking at obviously the case level, the prevalence per 100,000, but also the level and rate of change of the incidence to how quickly it's changing. I mentioned the Croatia example before. The extent of testing available within a particular country, the testing regime and test positivity, so not just the testing, but what proportion of those are positive, the extent to which cases can be accounted for by a contained outbreak as opposed to a more generalized transmission. So you might get a sort of situation in a country where there's just a problem in a particular place, and the extent of action from the government in that country and other relevant epidemiological information. So I mention all of that because it's not entirely just a case of
no, I understand that. I hope you don't rely on an algorithm to get through all of that, given Gavin Williamson's experiences. You just, with that note that you've got there, and I respect the use of the note, because there's no point in having people like you on the show unless you are accurate, and you clearly were there. Great detail of information. Your colleague Matt Hancock was on this show a couple of days ago, and he said, I have no secrets from you and your listeners, Alastair, but I am worried, and I am paid to worry. You're a member of the Cabinet. Do you remain worried about COVID-19, or do you share the Daily Telegraph's view that it's time to take a deep breath and be a bit more bold?
Well, I think that the only reason we can, if you like, to take the Telegraph, be a bit more bold is because we're taking it, blooming seriously, and the whole country has. And we've, what this country has sacrificed, along with many other countries in the world, in order to combat this disease, to get our level down to, as I say, about 11 cases per 100,000 of the population, has been immense. Now, it is much lower than, and we've seen in the daily mortality, the daily death figures, that it's dropped right down. But we also know that give this disease a chance and it will come back, and it will come back with a vengeance. So we've got to carry on being extremely vigilant, while at the same time finding ways to live, I'm afraid, alongside it until we have, I hope, that vaccine. I'm in a building here in Wales where I've come because we're doing this build announcement about an acceleration unit so we can get the infrastructure of this country right and do it quicker. And everywhere in this building, there are reminders about keeping safe from coronavirus. On the door, there's a think hand hygiene notice there. There are places so you can wash your hands everywhere as you walk around this building.
Let me butt in on that, Grant, only because time. I know you've got things you've got to do, and we've got other guests to talk to. But Hugh Pennington from Aberdeen, I put it to him because, again, data and the number of cases being identified by the testing that you celebrated a moment ago are on the up. Scotland, I know that's not your responsibility because they've devolution, but has had its worst run for weeks and weeks and weeks. I put it to Pennington that maybe we, the electorate, have taken our eye off the ball, and Pennington said, yeah, I fear that may be the case. Do you share that fear?
So I think people are still very aware of coronavirus. Where I think that we do need to remind ourselves is, when we say, and go back to the quarantine case for these countries, where we say you need to quarantine, it's because we need to protect the lower numbers that we have. And, I do appeal to people, don't come back and just ignore the quarantine, apart from the fact you're committing a criminal offence. If you do, you get a criminal record for it as well as a fine. It actually puts everybody else's lives in danger. And so it makes sense to do the things which have enabled us to succeed in fighting this disease. But it is different in different areas. We've seen these localised lockdowns. You've talked about what's happening in Scotland, where they've moved at a slightly different rate on some of these things. And here where I am in Wales, they are releasing some of their restrictions today as well. And it's right that different areas are able to respond differently. But I don't think people have forgotten, actually. I do think we all need to remind ourselves sometimes that.
We just lost that last bit. You said you don't think people have forgotten it, but we do occasionally.
Forgotten, but there are occasions where we do need to remind ourselves.
Okay.
We mustn't get lax about it.
Good. I've got you for 2 more minutes, and you are Transport Secretary, so I'm going to draw a line under COVID-19 just for a moment. You could make everybody very happy bunnies this morning if they use public transport by saying that the 1.6 percentage points rise in season tickets particularly, but rail fares generally, will not go ahead. We know what it would be if you did do it, and you and Chris Eaton-Jones, but will you announce here right now on Talk Radio that it won't go ahead?
Well, that's a matter for later in the year. There are no rises going on this year at all till next year. all of your listeners, whether they take public transport or not, will have been contributing towards keeping our public transport system flowing, running during this coronavirus pandemic, including to get the key workers to hospitals and care workers to look after us all. And they put a lot of money into it. How much? About $3.5 billion so far. And no doubt we will need more to do that. So, of course, there's always a playoff between the people who are using the service, the public transport, and the taxpayer more generally. And the taxpayer more generally has been enormously generous in order to keep the system going. It's right that there's a balance between the two.
So next year fares will go up by 1.6%.
I'm afraid it'd be wrong to tell people that there won't need to be fare rises. Inflation eats away at these things, and so you do need to keep up, because the taxpayer more generally has put a lot of money in, and you've got to make it fair to both sides. Most people don't actually use that service, so you've got to make it fair to everyone. But I say it's not an announcement today, because the fare rise isn't till next year. We're still, I know we're trying to draw a line on the coronavirus part of the conversation, but you and I don't know where we'll be.
No, I understand that, but you can't blame a chap for trying. Final question, Grant. Do you think privatized railways will survive COVID-19? You've had to take some back into public ownership because they can't make ends meet. Currently, you've just said billions of pounds propping them up. When this crisis is over, will more of those companies have to come back into public ownership rather than remain private?
So essentially, actually, all of those companies at the moment are having their revenues collected centrally, so all of them, and they're all...
I understand that. My point being is, do you keep them? You keep them, or do you feed them back to shareholders?
So in any case, coronavirus aside, actually, this was always due to change. I think that, taken as a whole, privatisation was an enormous success in doubling the number of people on our railways, twice as many journeys made, twice the distances and all the rest of it. But, and we'd identified this before coronavirus, before all these problems, it become very fragmented. So no one was really the sort of guiding mind looking after how the whole of the network was run. The fat controller didn't exist, as you say in the media. And because of that, sometimes the railway didn't run as well as it should have done. We all remember that timetable debacle of May 2018. So I'd already said we want to see a much more coordinated railway. There is, though, an absolute role for those private companies in it, because we want their ingenuity, we want their cash, we want their investment in it. But I want the whole thing to be a single, much more a seamless experience when you use our railways. We were already working on that through somebody called Keith Williams, who was carrying out a review to do that. In a sense, actually, coronavirus may have accelerated the progress on all of this, because, as you pointed out at the beginning, we are now actually in charge of running quite a lot of this, so it can speed up the end destination.
All right. Grant Shapps, I'm grateful for your time. Thanks for the detail on COVID-19 and that data, but also getting us up to speed on what's happening on the rail network.